Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's episode, host Casey Hinches talks with Katy Layman, an undergraduate research scholar who is doing a study on an easier way to plant daffodils. We look at a backyard hoop house with raised beds inside. Wildlife Specialist Dwayne Elmore has an unexpected invasive plant that is becoming a big problem in the state. And Barbara Brown cooks a vegetarian chili. Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Nursery, Tulsa's source for great gardens, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
Here at Oklahoma State University, there's a lot of research being conducted, and we often think of it being conducted by the professional scientists and the faculty, but we also have a lot of students that are doing some studies of their own. Joining me today is Katy Layman. She is an undergraduate research scholar and a senior in the Department of Horticulture. So you have a study going on. Can you tell me about it, Katy?
Yes, this study is seeing if bulbs can be planted above the ground without actually digging, and then if covered with mulch, if they will come up as normal.
Okay, so we potentially don't have to dig the daffodil bulbs into the ground.
Yes, that's what this study is looking at.
Okay, so what are you finding?
We're finding that the daffodil bulbs that are placed right on top of the ground and covered with mulch are doing just as well as our bulbs that we dug into the ground and planted.
Okay, and how many have you planted here?
In this section there's I think about 120, but we've actually done with our volunteers, the garden ambassadors, we did a section of bulbs up by the highway that has 10,000 bulbs in it.
Wow.
And they used this method and covered them with mulch, and it took just a few hours instead of several days.
So a big labor saving,
yes,
potentially. Okay, and so what bulbs are we looking at here? These are daffodils.
Yes, they are.
And are we just talking about daffodils, or are we talking about other bulbs also?
At this point, it's just daffodils.
Okay, all right. And now daffodils typically naturalize, and have we decided whether that will work for these?
We think that it's a definite possibility. This plot will be staying in for several years to see if we can see it happening in our research.
Okay.
But Dr. Anella, who I'm working with on this project, has done this same thing at his own home, have daffodil bulbs and covered them with mulch. And he's had that in for a couple of years, and he said that this year they've perennialized and they look even better than they did the first year.
So we're expecting that they will colonize, hopefully.
Yes.
And this is a small study, but it's an interesting aspect for homeowners to know about if they're looking for a lower maintenance way to have bulbs. And the other good thing is, you know, obviously if we don't have good soil, a lot of Oklahomans have clay soil. So that could potentially help also.
Yes, because we keep them above the ground, and so they have less of a potential of drowning anytime it gets really wet here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing with us, Katy.
Thank you.
We are here in Dr. Lynn Brandenberger's backyard. He is the food crop specialist for OSU Extension, and you're going to share with us something you built a couple of years ago, your hoop house.
Right.
Why did you build a hoop house over your raised beds?
Well, obviously we like to have food year-round, fresh vegetables. And so in this structure we can grow fresh vegetables all through the winter. We have to pick our crops right, but we can do it.
Right.
And so it just makes it a lot handier for us.
So you've got warmer temperatures in the wintertime to grow those crops.
Right.
And in the summertime it gets hotter also. So what
Right.
are you going to do going into those warmer temperatures to keep that heat down?
Well, the way this hoop house is made, the sides, we can take some wires off and then the sides will actually roll clear up.
Oh, okay.
And so we'll get full flow of air through there.
Right.
The other thing that helps regulate the temperature is this hoop house is about 10 foot tall, so it has a lot of space up above in the attic.
Allowing that heat to rise up.
So even in the winter time, it can get really hot in there really fast.
Okay, all right. So you've got some cool season crops growing in here.
A few.
You want to go in and take a look at them?
Sure.
Okay. Looks like you've got a nice crop of crimson clover growing here.
Yeah, we do. One of the things that I try to do is to use more sustainable methods to manage our soil here. And so this cover crop was planted last fall. It's been in the ground all winter.
Okay.
And it's a legume. It's actually inoculated with a bacteria that helps it capture or nitrogen out of the air.
Did you have to inoculate it, or did it come?
It was pre-inoculated
Okay.
seed.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, you let it grow up nice and tall, and it gets a lot of nitrogen, and then we have all this nice organic matter that you see here. And then we're going to basically just mow this, grind it all up with the lawnmower, and then we're going to till it into the soil.
Okay.
And you'll get to see my tiller in action.
So you mentioned that these seeds came pre-inoculated and they are a legume. So can you describe what that means a little bit more?
Yes, a legume is a crop that's in the bean and pea family. And so it has this symbiotic relationship with a bacteria. And so the bacteria, what it does is it's able to take nitrogen out of the air and fix it into the soil and into the plant, so the plant can use it. And then the plant provides a place for the bacteria to live, and it actually forms little nodules on its roots. And then that's where the bacteria actually hangs out. So you've kind of got this, you know, the bacteria is like, woohoo, got a free apartment. And then the plant says, well, hey, this works out great for me because I get some nitrogen, which is a major plant element that the plant needs.
And that's one of the nice things about legumes, is that they allow this bacteria to grow and bring more nitrogen into the soil naturally, more organically than adding synthetic fertilizers.
Right, and actually all the nitrogen, most of it's tied up in the plant. So then as the plant breaks down, it's released slowly, kind of like a slow release.
Right,
fertilizer.
so it's kind of storing that fertilizer for you. So
Right.
now we're going to cut this down and you'll allow that to decompose into the soil, getting that nitrogen back.
Right, so what we'll do is once we get this soil prepared, then we're going to start planting our summer crops. So we'll actually be putting some tomatoes in here because Dina, my wife, must have tomatoes.
Absolutely.
And so that's what this bed will be used for this summer.
Okay, excellent. So behind us here, you also have another bed that there's nothing planted in it right now. You decided
Right.
not to do a cover crop in this. Will you do a cover crop at some point in this bed?
Yes, we have kind of a unique situation. Well, maybe not so unique. Lots of gardeners have
We
this.
all have problems, right? So
Yeah.
what is our problem with this
okay,
soil?
there is trouble in paradise.
Okay.
yes. So we have all this beautiful sandy loam soil that we purchased and we brought and put into these raised beds. And actually what we found out was the soil's full of nematodes.
Okay. And so you've done a test and you found out, you've looked under a microscope, that there are nematodes in the soil, and that affects your crops, the roots of your crops and stuff. So how are you going to get rid of these nematodes?
Well, in the past, we've actually solarized the soil, and that's all we've done.
Okay.
Which basically heats the soil up to about 150 degrees naturally through sunshine. And that brings the population of these nematodes down considerably, and then you can grow for 2 or 3 years. But this year we're going to try something different.
Okay.
We're going to plant a cover crop of mustard, and this is a mustard that's been bred for high levels of chemicals that actually are biofumigants.
Okay.
They're naturally occurring.
Okay.
And so we'll grow that cover crop on there and then chop it all up and put it into the soil, and then we will tarp it with clear plastic, and we'll actually solarize with all that in there.
Okay, so you're going to first grow a crop here, and it's not like we can see nematodes or anything. This is microscopic, that you've got to look under a microscope to see these.
Right, and they look like
small
red wigglers in there, you know,
Right.
they're going crazy.
Right, so you're going to then plant the mustard, allow it to grow for a while, and then come back through, chop it down, and then put clear plastic over it.
Well, after we work the mustard into the soil.
After you till the mustard in the soil. Okay, and so that will heat that up, allowing those fumigants to come out of that mustard plant
Right.
and kind of gas out the nematodes, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So it won't necessarily kill all the nematodes, right? We're trying to really reduce the population, though?
Right, it's gonna bring the population way down.
Okay.
Because not only are we going to heat the soil way up, which works that way too, but then we're also going to add this biofumigant, which it should be a great combination.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Lynn, for sharing your backyard with us.
All right.
Here with Dr. Dwayne Elmore, a wildlife specialist for OSU Extension, and we're out in a field behind a neighborhood, and you can see that there's a forest growing here almost.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what we're looking at?
These are Callery pear. A lot of people know them as Bradford pear, which is one of the more popular cultivars of the Callery pear.
Okay, and so people are planting Bradford pears, and what they don't realize is they're reseeding out in the wild.
Yeah, they're highly invasive in Oklahoma, and they're invading a lot of prairies and shrublands, and has huge environmental consequences.
What makes them such an invasive species?
Well, a lot of the traits that we desire in them for a landscape plant, actually, they grow fast. They can grow in a wide variety of sites. So, and they produce abundant seed, which is bird dispersed.
Okay. So all this is just grown here because of birds primarily.
Yep.
And maybe have come from the neighborhood nearby from planted Bradford.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so what happens when your field looks like this? How do we manage this?
Well, if you have just small seedlings, mowing or burning can kill those seedlings, but once you have established trees like this, they'll resprout. So you have to use some type of herbicide control to keep them from resprouting, and they can either be cut and herbicide applied to the base of the tree, or you can inject it into the stem. There's different methods.
Okay, so at this point our problem's gotten worse because the trees have gotten bigger.
Absolutely.
And what you mentioned, it's dispersed by birds. What kind of birds are attracted to this type of tree?
Lots of different birds, but actually one of the more common wildlife damage questions that I get during the summer is problems with grackles in neighborhoods, and especially though places like strip malls and car dealerships where there's a lot of birds that are congregating and defecating on vehicles and people.
Yeah, they're annoying.
And the birds love roosting in these dense Bradford pears, so it's a huge problem from a bird damage standpoint to use this plant.
Okay, so how can we, manage that a little bit differently? Is there a different plant that we should use in our home landscape? Or?
Absolutely. We have a OSU fact sheet that talks about control of Bradford pears, but it also gives you alternatives, things like redbud, Mexican plum, American plum. These are all good native alternatives that are not invasive and also don't generally have such a bird problem. The other problem with Bradford pears a lot of homeowners complain about is that they tend to split during ice storms, and we have lots of ice storms in Oklahoma, so you invest a lot of time in this, ornamental plant, and then it splits in half during an ice storm, and that's very frustrating.
Right. So a lot of times people like Bradfords because they bloom in the early spring, but some of those plants you just mentioned, redbud, they also bloom in the spring, and they won't have that ice damage problem. And they're a native. Redbuds are native. Some of the plums are natives.
That's correct.
Now, all the trees that we're seeing in the wild that have these white flowers are not necessarily Bradfords, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of plum that are blooming now as well. So you have to, carefully look at the tree to make sure you know what you're dealing with, because there are native trees that are blooming white during the early spring. But Bradford is a major problem, particularly east of I-35. And, places like Arkansas, Missouri, it's actually one of their most problematic invasive plants now.
Really? Okay. So as a homeowner, they shouldn't be buying Bradfords or Callery Pears in the nurseries anymore.
I would highly encourage people not to plant them if you have them, to replace them. And the other thing I would encourage people to do, if they see Bradford pears offered for sale in nurseries, is to talk to the nursery owner and encourage them to offer alternative plants that are not invasive. I don't think a lot of people realize what an invasive species it is for Oklahoma.
So I think this is a great example of how a homeowner who maybe just has a small lot can actually impact the surrounding native plant community.
Absolutely.
So if they're nearby and they plant a Bradford, this might be a result.
That's right.
Chili is one of those great things that if you talk to certain individuals, they will tell you it's basically all meat, and if you talk to other people, it's a combination. So today I'm going to go clear off the other side. This is vegetarian chili that has no meat in it at all, but it's great, and if you wanted to add a little bit of meat to it, you could, but it's one of those great things that you can prep ahead, use convenience foods, and so it's going to work out fine, even if you're a big meat eater, which I am too. All right, I've got about a tablespoon of vegetable oil, and I'm going to put that in, and now that my pan is warmed up a little bit, which will help keep things from sticking, and we'll test it. That's close. We'll go ahead and add these in. You want the oil hot enough that you get a little bit of sizzle. I've got about half a cup of yellow or white onion that we're adding to this, and we're going to saute those around probably about 5 minutes. You can maybe turn them down a little bit than what we've got going here. You don't want them to burn if you can help it, or even brown, so just let them sizzle until they become translucent, and then we'll go ahead and add a few more things to the pot. I'm adding a chopped clove of garlic. Now if you get garlic in bottled jars, that's going to be about a teaspoon of garlic to that. And let that sizzle around while you're getting the next ingredient, which is 2 tablespoons of no salt added tomato paste. Now if you have to get the kind with salt in it, it's not a tragedy. It's better if it doesn't, but you'll be okay. Next to that, we're going to add some other seasonings to it as well. A half a teaspoon of chili powder. Now I'm using ancho chili powder, and I'll explain why. I've also got a half a teaspoon of cumin and a 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper. Now I use the ancho chili in this because I want to build flavors, because it's not going to cook a long time. We don't have meat to add flavors, so we need to find some other ways to boost what we're getting. And then I'm going to stir it around while it's hot and actually cook those seasonings a little bit to get some of the raw taste out. The same with the tomato paste. We want it to keep sizzling, but you need to keep it a close eye on it. You'll notice I took it off the heat. You could turn it down. I'm used to using an electric range at home, and turning it down doesn't do anything. So it takes too long to respond, so I tend to take it off the heat. To this, I'm going to add some water. And with the water, I'm doing a couple of things. One, I'm adding some of the liquid, but I'm adding it slowly at this point, because if there's any little toasty bits on the bottom, I want to be able to cook them up and bring them forward. Just sort of deglaze the pan by adding the water to it. And go ahead and add the rest. The recipe calls for a half a cup of water, but we're going to cook this quite a while. And so if you're going, it can cook up to an hour. If you're going to cook it shorter than that, start with a half a cup. If you know you've got time and you're going to let it simmer for the full hour, then either keep an eye on it and add some more as it goes and as it needs it, or go ahead and start with a little bit more at this point so that you don't have to keep quite as close an eye on it. All right, time to add everything else. I've got two kinds of canned beans. I have pinto beans and I also have kidney beans. Now the thing that you want to do if you're using canned beans is rinse them off and then drain them well, because they're much less apt to give you gas problems later on if you do that. Also, a lot of people simply don't like the sliminess that comes with the beans that come out of the can. So it's easy to rinse it off. You're not moving a lot of nutrition out of the can. You're just making it so more people are going to like it. Also have half a cup of shredded carrots. Here again, we're looking at ways where you can speed the process up. There are convenience products. These are actually available. The ones that I'm using are available on market. It's a way to use a convenience food. That's a healthy choice. You will pay a little bit more for it, but again, you're paying for someone's time, so that makes sense. Also to this, I'm going to add a 4-ounce can of chilies. And here you have the opportunity to make it spicier or less spicy by the kind of chili that you choose. I'm not a big spicy person. I know a lot of people in Oklahoma are, so I chose the mild ones, but feel free to choose the hotter ones if you've been down to Hatch. You could add to Mexico and have some New Mexico chilies. You could use those. You could also sub in about a half a cup of other kinds of peppers, anywhere from bell peppers to jalapeno peppers. This is where you get to be more creative and designate it just for your own family. Also in here, we have a 28-ounce can of diced tomatoes. Again, a convenience product that's on the healthy side. Cooked tomatoes are a very good choice. We're able to acquire some of the nutrients from them much more easily if they're cooked than if they're raw. So this is one of those instances where raw food isn't necessarily the best choice. And then the last thing I'm putting in at this point in time is a half a cup of frozen corn. Again, if you got fresh corn, it would work fine. If you have canned corn, that would also work fine. This we're going to bring to a simmer and let it simmer anywhere from, we have to have dinner on the table now, up to an hour. It could go a little bit longer if you chose to do that. I already have one ready to go, so you can see the difference in what they look like if they are after time has gone by. This one I actually did add a little bit more water to it. I thought it was getting a little bit dry, so in the end it went up to about a cup of water that got in there. Now remember those seasonings, the herbs that we added early, the chili powder, the ancho chili powder, which you could use regular chili powder or chipotle chili powder, whichever one you have, and the cumin. We added those early on because we wanted those flavors to be blended in and have a long time to develop. At this point in time, we have gotten most of our flavor development done with those deep flavors, so now we're going to add something that's towards the end that's going to be brighter. And so I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon of dried oregano to this, and that's going to be a flavor that you'll perceive well because it's added on the top of this and it's fresh. At least got more of a fresh flavor even though it's dry than the flavors that we've had blended in there for a long time would. So this is very simple. Now the nice thing about this particular recipe is that it is one that's going into some of the schools now. So we've scaled it down from 50 servings per recipe like they'd need in the public schools in the Cooking for Kids program down to what you need for your own family. So if you find that your kids come home and say, they really had this great chili, well you can find this recipe on the Cooking for Kids website in the family size portion. You are allowed and encouraged, if you choose to, let me see, I had a ladle here, to add some cheese to this if you'd like. This recipe, as I said, makes 4 servings, so there's plenty for everybody, and this actually has a serving taken out of it so that we can make sure it was going to taste all right before we did it for the show. So you could sprinkle a little cheese on it, either regular cheese, which is not vegetarian, or if you're concerned and want to follow that vegetarian lifestyle, for this recipe at least, there are some non-vegetarian cheeses that you could add on it as well. We've snuck a little bit extra nutrition in with the carrots. We've got 2 kinds of beans, so this one is a good choice. Kids like it. I think adults are going to like it a lot, and it doesn't take a lot of time to get ready. It freezes fairly well too. It's Vegetarian Chili for Oklahoma Gardening. I'm Barbara Brown.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Next week, Casey builds an unusual hotel for the garden. Things are really heating up in the prairie. Turfgrass specialist Justin Moss has chores and nifty gadgets to get our mowers ready for the season. And Barbara Brown prepares Baja fish tacos. So join us next week for more TV you'll grow to love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, TLC Garden Centers, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society.